You know when you spend years blaming someone for everything that's wrong in your relationship, only to discover that you were the problem all along? Well, that's me. My name is Amanda, I'm 31 years old, and for 3 years of my marriage I was the villain of the story, but I pretended to be the victim. I constantly complained about my husband, Tyler, to my friends, to my family, to anyone who would listen. I said he was distant, that he didn't pay attention to me, that our marriage was dying because of him. I posted indirect phrases on social media about empty relationships and absent partners. I cried to my mother saying I felt alone. Couples therapy. I suggested it 1,000 times, always blaming him. But the truth that nobody knew was this: I had someone else. I had an affair for 2 years. It wasn't a one-night stand. It wasn't a drunken mistake at a party. It was a complete parallel relationship, with feelings, plans, and promises. And while all this was happening, I would go home and accuse Tyler of being the reason for our unhappiness. I was the classic walking psychological projection. I blamed him for exactly what I was doing. You must be thinking I'm a monster. And maybe you're right, but let me tell you how I got here. How a girl who swore she'd never cheat became exactly that. How I built such an elaborate lie that I almost believed it. And how it all crumbled in the most devastating way possible. Because Tyler found out. Not in the way you imagine. He didn't find messages on my phone or see me with the other guy. It was much worse. And when the truth finally came out, I realized too late the damage I had caused. In his life, in mine, in everyone around us. I met Tyler when I was 23. It was at a work happy hour in Seattle, where I had just moved to start as a graphic designer at an advertising agency. He worked in technology, as a software developer. When we met, it was one of those instant connections. We talked all night, laughed at the same jokes, and discovered we had similar tastes in movies, music, and food. 2 weeks after our first date, we were practically living together. It was intense, passionate, one of those relationships your friends say is moving too fast, but you don't care. 9 months later, he proposed on a trail overlooking Mount Rainier. I said yes without hesitation. We got married a year later, a small ceremony in Portland, near where my family lived. The first 2 years were good. Not perfect, because no relationship is, but good. We worked hard, building our careers. I had gotten a promotion to art director. Tyler had moved to a promising startup. We were busy, but happy. We had plans. To buy a house, maybe have children in a few years, travel around Europe. Everything seemed to be going right. But then I met Ethan. It was at a design workshop in San Francisco. I was there representing the agency. He was a freelancer from another city. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't that explosive chemistry. It was something more subtle. Interesting conversations during coffee breaks. A drink after the lectures. Funny messages after I got back to Seattle. Friendship, initially. Or at least that's what I told myself. But friendship doesn't explain why my heart raced when I saw his name on my phone screen. It doesn't explain the secret thrill of exchanging messages in secret. It explains absolutely nothing of what came after. Before I continue telling you how I transformed into the person I always judged myself to be, tell me in the comments what city you're watching this video from. I want to know if there are people from Seattle, Portland, or anywhere in the United States or the world. Leave a comment below. I read them all. And if you're enjoying this story, even though it's heavy, leave a like because it really helps me continue bringing you these true stories. Now take a deep breath, because what comes next is heartbreaking. My relationship with Ethan started so gradually that I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment we crossed the line. After that workshop in San Francisco, we kept talking. First about work, about projects, about the design industry. Then about personal life. He had ended a long relationship 6 months prior, was rediscovering himself, traveling, working remotely from different cities. There was something seductive about the freedom he had. Tyler and I were in the adult commitment phase. Bills, responsibilities, routine. And Ethan represented something different. Spontaneity, adventure, possibilities. We started talking every day. Messages turned into calls. Calls turned into video calls. I religiously deleted my chat history. I changed his name in my contacts to something generic, like Sarah Work. I turned off notifications. I hid everything with surgical precision. 6 months after the workshop, Ethan said he was coming to Seattle for work. My stomach churned when I read the message. Part of me was excited. Another part knew that meeting in person would make it undeniably wrong, but I arranged to see him anyway. I told Tyler I had a dinner with clients. I met Ethan at a discreet restaurant far from the center, and it was exactly as intense as I imagined. The conversation flowed as it always did. The glances lasted longer than they should have. When we finished dinner, he suggested walking through Pike Place Market. I accepted, and it was walking through those streets, with Seattle sparkling all around, that he took my hand. I should have pulled away. I should have said I was married, that this was wrong, that we needed to stop, but I didn't. I held back. And when he kissed me under that awning, I kissed him back. It was that night that I officially became a traitor. After that night, I went into total panic mode. I got home at 2 in the morning. Tyler was asleep. I took a nearly boiling shower, as if I could wash away the guilt. I stayed awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of person I had become. I thought about telling Tyler. Kneeling, crying, begging for forgiveness. Ending it before it went too far. But when morning came and I saw him making coffee, smiling at me, asking how the dinner with clients had been, I lied, naturally. I described a fictional dinner with invented details. And I realized something terrifying. I was good at lying. The guilt lasted a few days. Then it began to subside. Ethan and I continued talking. He returned to Seattle 2 weeks later. We met again. This time it was straight to a hotel. I won't describe the details because that's not what this is about. It's about how icily I compartmentalized my life. During the day, I was Amanda, the devoted wife. I would cook dinner, watch series with Tyler on the couch, ask about his day at work. At night, when Tyler slept, I was a different Amanda. The one who talked to Ethan late into the night, who planned their next date, who lived a complete parallel life. And the scariest part, I started to like this duality. It was like having two lives. The stable one, and the exciting one. The real one, and the fantasy one. Tyler began to realize that something was different, but not in the way you imagine. He thought I was happier, lighter, smiling more affectionate, and I was. Because Ethan was filling a void I didn't even know I had. Tyler was receiving the improved version of me, fueled by the adrenaline of betrayal. It's sickening when you stop to think about it. 6 months passed like this. Ethan came to Seattle every 2 or 3 weeks. Sometimes I invented business trips and went to meet him in other cities. Portland, Vancouver, once even Los Angeles. Each trip was meticulously planned. Hotel reservations in the name of a fictitious client. Rehearsed stories to tell Tyler. Fake receipts that I asked colleagues to create for me. Yes, I involved other people in my lies. My best friend, Rachel, knew. Not all the details, but she knew I was seeing someone. She tried to stop me a few times. She said I was playing with fire, that Tyler didn't deserve this, that I would regret it. But I didn't listen. She was convinced she could manage. That she could have both. The stable marriage with Tyler and the overwhelming passion with Ethan. I started doing something terrible. I started creating problems in the marriage that didn't exist. I provoked small fights over insignificant things. I complained that Tyler worked too much, that we didn't do things together anymore, that our relationship was becoming monotonous. Do you know why I did that? Because I needed a justification. I needed to construct a narrative where I was the victim of a bad marriage, not the villain betraying a good husband. It was classic projection. Everything I complained about Tyler was actually what I was doing. You said he was distant. I was the one who was emotionally in another relationship. You said he wasn't trying anymore. I was the one who had given up on the marriage. You said I didn't feel loved. I was the one who was sharing my heart and body with someone else. Tyler was trying to fix it. He planned surprise dates. He wrote sweet notes. He suggested vacations, just the two of us, and I sabotaged everything. Because if our marriage improved, I would lose my excuse. Ethan started pressuring me to leave Tyler. He said we were wasting time, that it was obvious I wasn't happy in the marriage, that we should be officially together. And part of me wanted that. I wanted that free and exciting life he represented. But another part was afraid. Tyler represented stability, security, a planned future. With Ethan, everything was uncertain. He was a freelancer, didn't have a fixed residence, lived from project to project. What would it be like to build a real life with someone like that? I started postponing the decision. I told Ethan I needed the right moment, that I didn't want to hurt Tyler unnecessarily, that we needed to be strategic. But the truth is, I wanted to keep both of them. That's when things started to get really complicated. Tyler suggested we go to couples therapy. He said he felt we were drifting apart, that he wanted to understand what was happening, that he was willing to work on any problems we had. My first instinct was to refuse, but I realized that refusing would be suspicious. So I agreed. And I went to those therapy sessions prepared to perform. The therapist, Dr. Helen Morrison, was good. She asked tough questions. She dug deep. Tyler was brutally honest. He talked about how he felt I was unhappy but couldn't understand why. About how he tried everything but nothing seemed enough. About how he was afraid of losing the woman he loved. And me. I lied. I talked about feeling neglected, about a lack of emotional connection, about needing more attention. I painted Tyler as the absent husband who caused all our problems. The therapist looked at me with an expression I now recognize as professional skepticism. I think she knew. I think she sensed that something didn't add up in my story. A year and a half passed like that. A year and a half of lies, of a double life, of constant manipulation. And then something changed. Ethan got a long-term contract in Austin, Texas. 6 months of on-site work. He couldn't come to Seattle often. And I couldn't invent so many trips without raising suspicions. Our dynamic would have to change. He gave me an ultimatum. Either I decided to stay with him and we moved to Austin together, or he would consider our relationship over. I panicked. The idea of losing Ethan was unbearable, but the idea of leaving Tyler, of destroying our marriage, of admitting everything, was too. I was paralyzed between two lives, unable to choose. That's when I started seriously considering leaving Tyler. I began to imagine what it would be like. What I would say, how I would explain it, whether I would tell him about Ethan or invent other reasons. I talked to a lawyer about divorce. I researched apartments. I prepared the ground. I started to be even more critical of Tyler, creating more problems, amplifying every little flaw of his, until it seemed unbearable. I wanted it to make sense to everyone when I asked for a divorce. I wanted people to look at our marriage and say, "Oh yes, you could see it wasn't working." My mother noticed. She called me one night and asked directly what was going on, if there was someone else. I vehemently denied it. I was offended that she even suggested it. I turned the tables, saying she didn't understand how unhappy my marriage was making me, how much Tyler had changed, how much I was suffering. She believed me. Everyone believed me. Because I had constructed my narrative so carefully, with so many details, that it seemed true. And perhaps, on some twisted level, I believed it myself. I set a date. 2 weeks before Ethan moved permanently to Austin. That was when I would tell Tyler I wanted a divorce. Everything was planned. The words rehearsed. The arguments prepared. Even where I would stand after dropping the bomb. All at Rachel's house. But 3 days before the scheduled date, something happened that changed everything. Tyler came home from work early. I was in the living room, talking to Ethan on the phone. When I heard the door open, I hung up quickly. But not quickly enough. Tyler saw me. He saw my panicked expression. He saw how I hid my phone. He asked who I was talking to. I said it was Rachel. He didn't buy it. He asked to see my phone. My heart stopped. I refused. I said he was being controlling, paranoid, that he had no right to invade my privacy. I started a fight about trust and boundaries. I was using every manipulation tactic I knew. Tyler looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something I'll never forget. He said he didn't need to see my phone. That he already knew. I felt the ground disappear from under my feet. How could he already know? He sat on the sofa, with an unsettling calm, and began to speak. He said he'd suspected something for months. That he'd noticed subtle changes. The lies didn't add up. Me smiling at my phone when I thought he wasn't looking. The different perfume I smelled when I returned from trips. The hotel receipts he'd found by accident. He hadn't said anything because he was waiting for me to tell him. He was giving me the chance to be honest. And I never was. Worse, I was planning to leave him while painting him as the villain. I started to cry. But they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of panic because I'd been found out. Tyler didn't yell. He didn't break anything. He didn't do any of the dramatic things you see in movies. He just sat there, looking at me with a mixture of pain and disappointment that was 1,000 times worse than any yelling. He asked, "How long?" I couldn't lie anymore. I said, "A year and a half." I saw something break in his eyes. He asked if it was someone he knew. I said no. He asked if I loved the person. I stayed silent. Silence was answer enough. Then he asked the question that hurt the most. He asked if anything about our marriage had been real. If I had ever truly loved him, or if I had always just been good at pretending. That destroyed me. because the truth was complicated. I had loved Tyler. I still loved him, in a way, but I also loved Ethan. And in the process of trying to have both, I had destroyed everything. I tried to explain. I tried to say it wasn't planned, that it happened gradually, that I didn't want to hurt anyone. But even I knew how empty those words sounded. Tyler interrupted me. He said the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was the smear campaign. It was like I'd spent over a year painting him as the terrible husband, the one to blame for our problems, while I was the innocent victim. It was how I involved friends, family, even a therapist in my lies. How I made everyone believe he was inadequate when in reality it was me who was destroying our marriage. I told him I hadn't just cheated on him. I'd destroyed his reputation, his self-esteem, his perception of reality. For months he believed he was a bad husband, that he wasn't enough, that he was failing me. When all along, it was me. I was the problem. And I knew it and let him believe the lie. There was no defense against it. It was true. Every word. Tyler said he wanted a divorce, obviously, but first he wanted me to do something. He wanted me to tell everyone who had listened to my complaints about him the truth. My mother, my friends, our mutual friends, even the therapist. He wanted me to admit that I had lied, that he wasn't the problem, that I was. That was asking too much. It meant destroying my own reputation, admitting to everyone that I was the villain. But Tyler was inflexible. He said that if I didn't do it, he would tell the story for me. And he would show everyone the proof he had. Messages he managed to recover, receipts, everything. I agreed. Not because it was the right thing to do, but because I had no choice. And it was the most humiliating experience of my life. First I told my mother. She was shocked, then horrified, then furious. She said terrible things, all deserved. That she had raised a better daughter than this. That she was disappointed. That she needed time to process who I really was. My friends reacted in different ways. Some cut off contact immediately. Others tried to understand, but the disappointment was obvious. Rachel, who had known for months, was also confronted. Our friendship never recovered. The worst was the session with Dr. Morrison, the therapist. I took Tyler with me and confessed everything in front of her. I admitted that I had lied in every session, that I had manipulated the narrative, that I had used therapy as just another tool to make Tyler look guilty. She remained professionally calm, but you could see she was shocked. She said that in 20 years of practice she had rarely seen such systematic manipulation. She strongly recommended that I seek individual therapy because there were clearly deeper issues that needed to be addressed. I left that office feeling smaller than an insect. While all this was happening, Ethan was waiting for my decision about Austin. I told him that Tyler had found out, that we were getting divorced. He was relieved. He said we could finally be together for real. But something had changed in me. Seeing the pain I caused, Tyler, having to face the consequences of my lies, made me question everything. Was what I had with Ethan real? Or was it just the thrill of the forbidden? Could we build something solid on foundations of betrayal and lies? I started postponing conversations with him, being less responsive. He noticed. He came to Seattle unannounced, saying we needed to talk in person. We met at a cafe. He was excited, talking about our future together in Austin, about apartments he had seen, about how amazing it would be to finally be a real couple. And I looked at him and felt nauseous. Not because he had done anything wrong, but because I realized I had romanticized our relationship because it was secret. The forbidden aspect was part of the attraction. And now that there were no more barriers, the magic was gone. I told him I wasn't going to Austin. That I needed some time alone to figure out who I was, to deal with the mess I'd created. He didn't understand. You got angry. I told him he'd waited for me, that he'd believed the promises I made, that he'd planned his whole life around me. And he was right to be angry. I'd used him too. Maybe not in the same way I used Tyler, but I'd made promises I didn't intend to keep. He'd built fantasies he knew would never come true. He left in a rage. He blocked my number. And honestly, I don't blame him at all. He deserved much worse. The divorce process was quick. Tyler didn't want to prolong it. We divided everything fairly. He didn't try to harm me financially, even though he had every right to. He was more generous than I ever deserved. He kept the house, it made sense. He was the one who made the down payment. I took my share of what we built together and rented a small apartment in another neighborhood in Seattle. A place without memories, where I wouldn't run into places we used to frequent. The following months were the loneliest of my life. I had lost my husband, my lover, my friends, the respect of my family. People we knew mutually took sides, and surprisingly, almost everyone sided with Tyler. Because he didn't have to say anything. I admitted everything myself. I went through a deep depression. There were days I didn't get out of bed. I saw no meaning in anything. My work suffered. I almost lost my job. I finally sought professional help. I found a new therapist, Dr. Karen Patel, and this time I was completely honest. I told her everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every horrible moment. She didn't judge me, but she didn't give me a free pass either. You asked difficult questions. Why did you need validation from two men at the same time? Why did I build an identity based on being desired? Where did this need to control narratives come from? I discovered things about myself that weren't comfortable. That I had a morbid need to be seen as a victim because victims receive sympathy without having to work for respect. That I was afraid of real vulnerability, so I created false versions of intimacy. That I had learned early on that performance was safer than authenticity. These were explanations, not excuses. Understanding why I did something terrible didn't make it any less terrible. But it gave me tools to avoid repeating the same mistakes. 6 months after the divorce, I ran into Tyler at a coffee shop. It was totally accidental, unplanned. He was with a woman. Beautiful, smiling at him, clearly on a date. My first instinct was jealousy. Then shame. Then something more complex. Relief, perhaps. To see that he was moving on. That I hadn't permanently destroyed his capacity to trust and love again. Our eyes met. He nodded. Somewhat awkwardly. I waved back. The woman with him asked something, and he answered. Probably explaining who I was. The ex-wife, the one who cheated. I left the coffee shop without ordering anything. I went home and cried. Not because I wanted Tyler back, but because I was finally processing the magnitude of what I had lost. Not just a marriage, but a good person. A person who genuinely loved me while I pretended. In therapy, we talked about that encounter. Dr. Patel asked how I felt. I said I felt loss. But also a little hope. Because if Tyler could move on, maybe there was hope for me too. Not about regaining what I lost, that would never be possible. But about becoming a better person. I started making real changes. Not performances of change, but genuine inner work. I stopped posting on social media completely. I realized that a large part of my need for external validation came from there. I cut contact with people who allowed me to be my worst version, including friends who knew about the betrayal and encouraged me instead of confronting me. I started volunteering at a shelter for women victims of domestic violence, not because I thought it erased what I did, but because I wanted to use my time for something bigger than my own drama. A year after the divorce, I received an unexpected message. It was from Tyler's girlfriend, the woman I saw with him at the coffee shop. My first thought was that she was going to confront me, yell at me, tell me to stay away from him. But that wasn't it. She introduced herself as Claire. She said Tyler had told her the whole story, that she knew what happened, and that she was contacting me not out of anger, but because Tyler was considering therapy to deal with some trust issues my betrayal had left behind. She wanted to know if I would be willing to participate in a closure session. So he could ask questions he never asked, say things he couldn't say, find some kind of peace. My first reaction was to refuse. The idea of facing Tyler again, of reliving everything, was terrifying. But I talked to my therapist. She said it could be beneficial for both of us. That closure wasn't about forgiveness, but about letting go. I agreed. We scheduled it for 2 weeks later, at the office of a neutral therapist. I spent those 2 weeks with anxiety destroying my stomach. I prepared what I would say, practiced in the mirror, wrote letters I never sent. When the day arrived, Tyler was different. More mature, in a way. Less hurt, more resolved. We sat in opposite chairs, the therapist between us. Tyler spoke first. He said he needed me to know a few things. That what hurt the most wasn't the physical betrayal, but the emotional one. That he could have dealt with a mistake, but couldn't process that it was systematic. That for months he blamed himself, questioned his every action, tortured himself trying to be better. When the problem was never him. He said it destroyed his self-confidence in ways he was still working to recover. I listened to everything Tyler had to say without interrupting. Every word was a knife, but he deserved every single one. When he finished, it was my turn. He said he had no excuses, that he had spent the last year in therapy trying to understand why I did what I did, but that reasons didn't justify actions. He said he was right about everything. That I had been cruel, manipulative, cowardly. That I had stolen months of his life that he could have spent being happy instead of blaming himself for imaginary problems. I apologized. Not the kind that expects forgiveness, but the kind that acknowledges the damage caused. He said that if he could go back, he would do 1,000 things differently. But that he couldn't, so the only thing left was to ensure that he would never repeat those mistakes. That he was working to be a better person, not for him, but for me. And for anyone who might have the misfortune of getting involved with me in the future. Tyler listened. Then he said something surprising. He said he forgave me. Not because what I did was forgivable, but because carrying anger was weighing too heavily on him. That forgiveness was for him, not for me. It was him letting go of the weight so he could move on completely. And he hoped I would find peace, too. That broke me in a way no accusation could have. I cried. I gave thanks. And we left that session with something resembling closure. Not friendship, we would never be friends, but a mutual recognition that we both deserved to move on. Claire, who had been waiting outside, stopped me as I was leaving. She said she admired my courage to show up, that Tyler was an incredible person who deserved someone who valued him, and that she hoped I would find happiness too. Her silent forgiveness was almost harder to process than Tyler's. After that closing session, something changed in me. Not instantly, not magically, but gradually. The guilt I carried began to transform into responsibility. It was no longer about punishing myself eternally. It was about doing better from then on. I continued therapy. Twice a week initially, then once, now bi-weekly. Dr. Patel helped me deconstruct patterns I had developed since adolescence. The need to be desired to have value. The tendency to create dramas to feel alive. The inability to be comfortable with real intimacy. I reconnected with my mother. It was slow, careful. She was still hurt, but she was willing to try. Monthly dinners that were awkward at first, but became more natural. She will never see it the same way. I know that. But there is growing respect as she sees real changes. At work, I focused intensely. Not as an escape, but because I discovered that genuine creativity was liberating. I won awards. I was promoted to creative director. My boss commented on the transformation she saw in me. She said I seemed more present, more authentic. I didn't tell the whole story, but I appreciated the comment. I made new friends. People who knew me as the current version of myself, not the problematic versions of the past. It was refreshing not having to carry baggage, not having to explain or justify. I could simply be Amanda. The imperfect but honest Amanda. I stayed single for 2 years after the divorce. Purposefully, I needed to learn to be alone. Not to define my identity through relationships. It was terrifying and necessary at the same time. I discovered hobbies I enjoyed, ceramics mainly. Something about shaping clay with my hands was therapeutic. Imperfections became part of the piece, not flaws to be hidden. 2.5 years after my divorce, I met someone. I wasn't looking, I wasn't using dating apps, it just happened. In a pottery class, coincidentally, his name was Marcus. Calm, patient, a high school teacher. Different from Tyler in almost every way. And definitely different from Ethan. There was no dramatic intensity, just ease. Conversations that flowed naturally. Genuine laughter, mutual interest without games. When he asked me out, I panicked. I told my therapist I didn't know if I was ready, if it was fair to him, if I was capable of not messing things up again. She asked a simple question. Have you learned from your mistakes? I honestly thought about it. I had spent 2.5 years doing difficult inner work. I had confronted every toxic behavior. I had learned to be honest even when it was uncomfortable. So I said yes. She smiled, said I deserved a chance to try again. Marcus and I started dating, slowly without rushing. And for the first time in my life, I was completely transparent. In the 3rd week, I told him about my previous marriage, about the betrayal. Above all, I expected him to run away. But he listened. He asked questions. Not judgmental ones, but curious ones. He wanted to understand. I said that everyone has a past, that what mattered was who I was now. That for the past few weeks, the person he knew was honest, kind, and healthily self-critical. That meant more than he could have imagined. We decided to take things slowly, to establish solid foundations. Open communication was rule number 1. If something bothered us, we talked about it. If someone needed space, they communicated. No games, no manipulation, no pretense. It was scary to be so vulnerable, but also liberating. 6 months into my relationship with Marcus, I faced my first major test. He had to travel to an educational conference in Chicago. A whole week away, and my mind immediately went to dark places. Old insecurities resurfaced. What if he met someone there? What if he realized he could have something better? But this time, instead of acting on these insecurities in destructive ways, I talked to him. Openly. I said I was scared, that my past was making my head create bad scenarios. Marcus sat with me. He held my hand. He said he understood where the fear came from, but that I wasn't that person anymore. And that he also had insecurities. He had been betrayed in a previous relationship too, so he understood the fear on both sides. We established daily check-ins while he was away. Not out of distrust, but out of connection, and it worked. He called every night, told me about his day, I told him about mine. There was no drama, no suspicion, just two adults maintaining a relationship even at a distance. When he returned, I realized something important. Trust wasn't about not being afraid. It was about communicating fear and working together to deal with it. At work, I received an interesting opportunity. A competitor offered me the position of executive creative director with a significantly better salary. Years ago, I would have accepted immediately. But this time, I stopped to think. The new position would require constant travel, insane hours, less time for therapy, for relationships, for the things I had learned were important. I talked to Marcus about it. He said he would support me regardless of my choice, but that he thought I should consider what I really wanted from life. Not what seemed impressive or what paid the most, but what would truly make me happy. I turned down the job offer. I chose quality of life over status. Years ago, that would have been unthinkable. But I had learned that chasing outward appearances of success had led me to very dark places. I stayed in my current position. Less prestige, less money, but infinitely more balance. Marcus and I decided to live together after a year of dating. It was a long discussion. I was nervous for all the obvious reasons. Moving in together was when my previous marriage had started to crumble, when I began to feel the need for escape. But this time it was different. I wasn't running away from anything to be with Marcus. I was choosing to build something with him. We found a small apartment in Fremont. We split all expenses 50-50ths. We established clear rules for cohabitation. And for the first time, the relationship felt like a real partnership. Not performance, not dependence, but collaboration. 3 years after the divorce, I did something I never thought I would do. I wrote a letter to Tyler. I didn't expect a reply. I didn't want to reopen communication, but I felt the need to express gratitude. I thanked him for giving me consequences instead of simply destroying me. For insisting that I take responsibility publicly. For forcing me to face who I really was. He said that, although painful, it had been the greatest gift anyone had ever given me. Because it put me on the path to real change. I sent it to his old address hoping it would be forwarded if he had moved. 2 weeks later, I received a short reply. Tyler thanked me for the letter. He said he was happy that I had found peace, that he had married Claire and that they were very happy, and that he wished me all the best. It was the final closure I didn't know I needed. I cried, reading that letter. Tears of gratitude this time, not of shame. Marcus proposed to me on an ordinary day. It wasn't elaborate. There was no audience, no production. We were making dinner together at home. He was chopping vegetables, I was making rice, and he simply asked. He said he wanted to spend the rest of his life with me. That he was sure. I froze. Immediate panic. Not because I didn't want to, but because all the memories of my previous marriage came flooding back at once. What I had become when I was married. How Isley lies came out of my mouth. Marcus saw my panic. He turned off the stove. We sat on the kitchen floor. He asked what was going through my head. I told him. About the fear of repeating patterns. About how marriage had brought out my worst side before. About not wanting to do that with him. Marcus listened. Then he said something profound. He said I wasn't that person anymore. That I had done years of work to change. That he had seen consistent evidence of that change. But that he understood the fear. And that we could postpone, or not get married at all, if that would make me feel safer. That titles didn't matter as much as commitment. That made me realize something. My fear wasn't of marriage, it was about myself. And trusting myself was the last step I needed to take. I said yes, but I asked that we do premarital therapy. I wanted tools to deal with conflicts, to communicate needs, to maintain honesty even when it was difficult. Marcus agreed immediately. We did 6 months of weekly sessions before the wedding. We discussed everything: finances, children, career, expectations, fears. It wasn't romantic, it was work. But it was necessary work. And it made me feel prepared in a way I never had been before. We got married in a small ceremony. 20 people, immediate families and closest friends. My mother was there, proud this time. She had seen real change over the years. I wrote my own vows. They were brutally honest. I talked about my past, about mistakes I'd made, about the work I'd done to change. I promised honesty even when it made things difficult. I promised communication even when my instinct was to hide it. I promised to remind him every day how much I appreciated him, because I had learned the hard way what happens when you stop doing that. Some people cried. Not because it was beautiful in the traditional sense, but because it was real. Marcus promised patience, understanding, but also accountability. He said he wouldn't allow games or manipulation into the relationship, that we would be equal partners or we would be nothing. It was the most unromantic and simultaneously most meaningful wedding vow I've ever witnessed. Our honeymoon was simple. A cabin in Oregon, hiking, conversations, disconnecting from the world. We didn't need a big international trip. We needed time together, without distractions. We returned to normal life. And normal was good. It was stable, predictable, safe. Things I used to see as negative, I now saw as anchors. At work, I continued to grow. But this time without stepping on anyone. Not manipulating or using people. Just doing good work, being professional, helping colleagues when possible. The recognition I received was now based on real merit, not performance. It made a difference in how I felt about my achievements. My therapist commented on transformation. She said that in 5 years of working together, she had seen one of the most significant changes in her career. Not because I pretended to change, but because I really put in the hard work. Today, 5 years after my divorce from Tyler, I look back and hardly recognize who I was. Not in the sense of having forgotten, but in the sense of having fundamentally evolved. I still go to therapy. Monthly now, no longer weekly, but I continue. Because change isn't destiny, it's a continuous journey. Marcus and I are doing well. We have problems like any couple, but we deal with them head on. Nothing stays buried, nothing festers in the dark. Communication is our foundation. I consider having children sometimes. But I'm also afraid. Afraid that the stress of parenthood might bring back old patterns. Marcus says that if we decide to have children, we'll face it together. For now, we're fine just the two of us. My relationship with my mother is better than ever. She respects who I've become. She says she's proud of the work I've done to change, even if the catalyst was so ugly. I don't have contact with most of the people from my past. Rachel, my old friends, they've all moved on, and that's okay. Some burned bridges shouldn't be rebuilt. Sometimes I see Tyler and Claire at city events. Seattle isn't that big. We exchange polite nods. Nothing more. And that's appropriate. Ethan, I haven't heard from him in years. I hope you're doing well. I hope you've found someone who can love you without using you as an escape. If I could go back and change what I did, obviously, yes. I caused real harm to people who didn't deserve it. But I can't. I can only guarantee that I learned, that I grew, that I will never be that person again, and live every day proving it. To Marcus, to my mother, to myself, mostly to myself, because in the end, I was the one who needed to learn to trust myself again. And that was my story about how I spent years blaming my husband for problems I was causing, about how the truth always comes out, and about how real change is possible when you stop running away. Comment what you thought and leave a like. Stay tuned for the next story. See you soon.